and welcome to your library at home. My name is Sam Hagan and I'm part of the public programming team at the State Library of New South Wales. I'd like to begin tonight by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting. I live and work on country on Gadigal land, and I'd like to take this opportunity to pay my respects to elders past, present, and of course, emerging. Also welcome to you this evening. So tonight's talk, we've got the fabulous Jess Scully and the equally fabulous Benjamin Law. And we're celebrating the launch of Jess's first book, Glimpses of Utopia, something that we'd probably all like a little glimpse of right now. But this book is just full of information and help to, guide us into confronting some of the challenges that we're having today, but confronting them with creativity and resilience and compassion. So those of you who are regular library viewers will know that I'll be back at the end to present your questions, and you can type in any questions at the Q&A button on the bottom of the screen anytime through the talk, so feel free to do that. But now I'm going to introduce the fabulous Ben. Ben is an Australian writer and broadcaster. He's also the author of The Family Law, Geisha, Adventures in the Queer East of the Quarterly Essay, Moral Panic 101. That's two, that's Geisha. Adventures in the, sorry, I'm stuffing that up, Ben. You'll correct me. He's also the editor of Growing Up Queer in Australia. Ben created and co-wrote 3 seasons of the award-winning SBS TV series, The Family Law, which was based on his memoir, and his sold-out debut play, Torch the Place. Every week, Ben also co-hosts ABC RN's weekly national pop culture show, Stop Everything. After that very garbled intro, Ben, I'm terribly sorry. I would like to introduce Ben Law. Thank you so much for joining us, Ben.
G'day, Sam. G'day, everyone. And thank you so much, Sam, for that lovely introduction. That was not garbled at all. That was comprehensive, very kind, and very lovely. Hello, everyone out there who is tuning into this Zoom tonight. Thank you for joining us on a school night. It's a real honour and pleasure to be joining you here from where I'm currently standing, which is on Turrbal and Yuggera land, also known as Brisbane. I usually live on Gadigal land, but I'm here with family at the moment. And I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. First Nations Australians, of course, have been sharing knowledge here for tens of thousands of years, at least 65,000. And we are very grateful to elders past and present that we can continue sharing knowledge here on what is and what will always be Aboriginal land. Now, I don't think it's a big secret that a lot of us are losing hope in 2020. Here in Australia, we started the year off with catastrophic fires that weren't even meant to be possible and within the realm of science yet. COVID-19 has almost diabolically revealed and exploited the weaknesses in models of government around the world. And all of this isn't just making us question government, which of course is a healthy thing. Instead, it's making us distrustful and despondent in democracy itself, its effectiveness, its role, and whether it has the ability to adapt and change. So the book we're celebrating and launching tonight with the State Library of New South Wales couldn't be more urgent and timely. It's called Glimpses of Utopia, Real Ideas for a Fairer World. And right at the top, its author asks a really big question. Participatory deliberative democracy is great, but how can it stand up against voter discontent, a tidal wave of disillusionment with democracy in general, and fear of the future? It's almost an overwhelming question, but for me, this book has reminded me that we do have solutions and resources already. We just need willpower and guidance. And this galvanizing and clarifying book gives us all of that. It's a mission statement. It's a deep dive into fixing things that feel impossible. And it's also a really wonderful call to arms. Its author is public art curator, festival director, and media producer, and Sydney's Deputy Lord Mayor. She was the founding director of Vivid Ideas, Australia's largest creative industries event, and has curated creative sector events, including Junket, TEDx Sydney, and curating participation. She is the overachieving child of immigrant parents. So of course, to read out her entire list of achievements would consume this entire session, but please give it up for Jess Scully. Jess, welcome to the chat.
Thanks so much. That's lovely. What a joy to be here.
It's so good to see you, and so great to see you, especially in that outfit. Before we start with the proceedings tonight, look, let's just take that in and also support local art and artists, because this design is one of our own, right, Jess?
Absolutely. So this is Romance Was Born, amazing Sydney fashion label, working with the May Gibbs collection, which is just also iconic Australian aesthetic and design and creativity. So what's not to love?
Jess, it's so good to see you, especially after reading this book of yours, which clarifies and I guess almost reassures me in a lot of ways that the biggest questions of our time actually do have answers. So I want to start with a really obvious question, which is why this book and why now?
First of all, I want to acknowledge I'm on Gadigal land as well, just before we kick off, and that sovereignty was never ceded over this place, and it remains Aboriginal land. So I want to extend respect to elders past and present as well. And wow, why this book? I mean, I think I have this enormous privilege of encountering people and stories and movements, projects that give me a sense of hope that the hard work is underway in lots of different categories. And I also feel like I have this advantage of being a bit of a generalist. I'm not a particular category expert in in one category, but I see across lots of different categories, and it's been the same through my creative industries work, and now as a city maker, I get to experience little bits of the puzzle, understand little bits of how the system works and how it all comes together. So I feel like I'm in this unique position to see that things aren't as gloomy and doomed as they appear on the surface. And so I wanted more people to have that sense of optimism, that there are alternatives to the way we do things now, and we can get a better world, and that a dystopian outcome is not inevitable. Because if we don't see an opportunity for a better world, then why would we fight for it? Why would we make sacrifices? I think if we don't believe that another way is possible, it's likely that people will become more guarded, more tribal and isolated, and that they'll build walls and bunkers and doomsday prep themselves into safety for them and their own, but not contribute to a broader societal mission of building a future we want.
When I read Glimpses of Utopia, I get the sense that part of the spirit in which it's written is one as antidote and in response to the general feeling that's out there at the moment. And you mentioned doom and gloom, and one of the things that's quite palpable about this book is how current it feels. You start by you talk about the bushfires, you talk about the Indonesian floods, you reference the fact that life expectancy is declining in, supposedly developed countries like the US and the UK, and you talk about wealth disparity, and COVID is also mentioned in the book too. I mean, to what extent, you're talking about we need hope, we need optimism, we need solutions, but are you completely immune or inoculated to the sense of despair yourself?
No. And every second day, last night, I couldn't sleep watching what happened in Beirut. And I thought,
oh my gosh,
how do we have this conversation today in the context of that and that devastation that's being wrought on a community that's already suffering in so many different ways and have really copped it through COVID and, corruption and a dysfunctional and unequal society. And every day there's something to rock that sense of optimism, which is why I think we can't just have this idea that the feel-good stories are the 30 seconds at the end of the news where the bears are swimming in the pool in the backyard. That's not good enough for me. And just having a couple of that building's got a green wall and that project is recycling coffee cups, that stuff's all great, but unless we address some of this fundamental systemic malaise, some of that structural stuff, then I don't think we're going to be making enough of a genuine impact for people to feel like it's sincere and it's effective, And I think the problem with sort of not addressing change at a systemic level, and I'm talking about politics, money, power, land, like the stuff, the architecture of our society, if we don't address that, then it's really easy for compelling but inaccurate and incomplete stories and narratives to take a hold. And I think that's why we're seeing the rise of a conspiracy mindset at the moment, as people think this system isn't working, something's got to explain it. Maybe it's this thing or that technology or that movement or that social group who are doing it. So we got to go back to the deep fundamental basics to explain why it's not working, and to also expose the fact that it's not working for a lot of people. This isn't on you for not working hard enough. This is a societal problem.
This book is so full of lessons, and some of the lessons are ones that you reflect on during this time of pandemic. Also, shout out to if anyone is joining us here from Victoria into this chat as well. We are with you, commiserations as well. But you say that there were 2 lessons from early days in the pandemic that you learned. And I think this speaks to broader themes in the book as well. One of the lessons is none of us can live in an economy alone. The second point is major policy pivots can be enacted in the face of immediate threat. And I thought these are 2 really, like, as soon as you expressed them in the book, I'm like, oh my God, that's so, I haven't heard anyone sharpen in on those 2 points about what the pandemic has taught us. Can you expand on those points? That first one of none of us can live in the economy alone, and 2, major policy pivots can happen in threat.
Yeah, well, take the second one first. There are so many kind of untouchable sacred cows of, oh no, we couldn't possibly do that. We couldn't possibly give everyone a payment. We couldn't possibly shut this down or do that or do the other. Do you know what? We can. Politics is actually just a system of social decision making, and our representatives work for us. And we have to explain what our values are and create a momentum and a sense of urgency for change to happen. And the thing about this moment is that it's the sort of fast forward, compressed and accelerated version of the crisis, the slow burn, slow scale car crash that we're in when it comes to climate change and inequality. I think there are very similar outcomes, but because it's happening very slowly over the course of decades, or it has been, it's been harder to put on the pressure for immediate action. So I think that idea that that governments can make unexpected policy changes when a crisis is revealed has been really illuminating. And then, also this idea that we don't live in an economy alone. I mean, all we ever hear are measurements of our economy, and we never hear measurements of our society and whether it's functioning and whether the economy actually serves the society. And there was a headline that I saw in the news a couple of days ago, which was, economy set to bounce back, jobs and wages won't. And I thought, well, what is the economy then? If the experience of people and what they are able to do and pursue with their lives isn't connected to the economy, then what is it? And what relationship does it have to our society? And I think we very rarely tease out that relationship. It's almost like it's this own, it's this own fragile ecosystem we need to maintain for its own sake. But actually, it should be in service of society, and we should also measure other things. And that's what things like the wellbeing budget in New Zealand are about, which are about giving governments other metrics to measure their success against. And that's about measuring, child poverty, soil erosion, pollution, investment in local R&D and research as things that have to be assessed and that governments are accountable for at the time of every budget every year. And I think that's really meaningful. I think if we can find ways to count things other than the economy, we have a more holistic picture of what life looks like for people in a country.
So about changing the paradigm, the parameters, and the vocabulary with which we talk about value and worth in this economy. Jess, I want to get into the fun part of the conversation now, and I hope it's the fun part for you, because reading the book, one of the fun things about it is getting to travel around, well, kind of travel around the world, but to actually go to different parts of the world and realize that we're not alone in these conversations and that other people are coming up with solutions, really innovative solutions. And in some case, solutions that seem obvious, but you just haven't encountered them before. So you take us to people who are coming up with interesting solutions for problems in India, Lebanon, Kenya, Bangladesh, Iceland, Taiwan, when it comes to things like energy and finance and governance and all that sort of stuff. I want to ask you, what was your favorite? I mean, what really, when you talk about this book, you're like, okay, so I researched all of this stuff, but I've got to really tell you about this really cool innovation that this group in this country have come up with.
Oh, I'm torn. I have a lot of favorites, but top three favorites. I'll narrow it down. I think Taiwan is killing it. Like, I loved Audrey Tang and her story. She's Taiwan's digital minister. You know, she's like 36, a trans woman, you know, former tech startup leader, now the digital minister of Taiwan. And she's like, if I can't get broadband to every person in Taiwan across like a whole range of islands, it's personally my fault. You can email me. You know, she is transforming the way that people in Taiwan engage with government. And her approach is forking the government, which is less confrontational than it sounds. It's basically saying, keep on doing what you're doing, but we're going to try all this other stuff out here, and the stuff that works will merge back into the system as we operate it, which is a concept from tech development. So it's really cool seeing these different disciplines influencing government and governance. Love Audrey. Iceland. So Iceland also has a really people-powered democracy. And again, it's a game designer and a whole bunch of tech nerds who are involved there. It's like tech nerds working for good, which would be nice. It's good to see. It's a bit rarer than it should be. And then the last sort of favorite, too many favorites, but this one is Rosario in Argentina. And this is a local government party who basically say, they're called Ciudad Futura, which means future city, and they're saying we have to model the future before it's here. And what they do is basically, well, they won a battle to ban gated developments in their city, and instead of having this like luxury golfing estate, they were like, do you know what, we're going to put a dairy farm here and a dairy, and we're going to make milk, yogurt, and dulce de leche, which is like very important culturally, but so that there'd be jobs, food, they build schools, and then they took over a nightclub. And so their headquarters is basically a nightclub that works 24/7. You can stage shows, it's a cooperative. So it's a space for creative infrastructure in a city, as well as a place where people can have gathering and engage in politics. And I mean, there's so many, but those are three of my faves.
That's really, really cool. I also loved learning about all the different names of the revolutions as well, like the pots and pans revolutions, the sunflower revolution. It's almost like, what domestic item do you want to use to make a revolution with? You know, they're all here and ready to go. But as you bring up those examples, they strike me as all examples of the intersections and possibilities between digital technologies and being open to changes in what democracy looks like, that democracy doesn't need to be a rigid beast. And with that in mind, do you have any theories as to why we're not more nimble here? Or is that a misperception on my part that we're not as nimble here? When I have conversations with people who work in tech and startup, you know, we're some of the world leaders within those realms. What's preventing us from doing the same things that they're doing in Taiwan, Iceland, and beyond?
There's something that Karen Tepp from Rosario in Argentina said to me, and she said, you know, we have allowed civil society to keep using the tools of the 21st century, the 20th century, or even the 19th, the 18th century, while the world of business and commerce has like raced out in front, and they're working with the tools that we have today. I mean, it's absurd that our federal parliament can't meet right now because they're not allowed to use this. You know, at council, we've been meeting like this since March. but our federal parliamentarians aren't able to do so. And that's just a really simple example of a change that should have been implemented months ago. So we haven't invested in civil society, and we haven't, I don't know why, we haven't considered it essential to upgrade it and make it at least as good as the commercial world is, in terms of the tools that it has to use, or the flexibility it might have or be able to adopt, or even the freedom to make mistakes in the way that the world of business can. And in part, I think that's because Australia has been very comfortable. And I think we haven't really had that many big crises. And when I wrote this book, I knew that the 2008-2009 financial crisis would be a big theme, but it was in every story. That was a pivot point for a lot of countries where things either got dramatically worse or people stopped and said, we're not going to let it continue like this, and presented alternatives. And in Australia, we kind of dodged it, and we were really lucky, and we have this incredible luck in Australia. And even with the COVID crisis, we have more or less dodged it, the severity of it that other places have experienced. And because of that, I don't think we've ever had to stop and assess and challenge some of our fundamental assumptions and redesign for the 21st century. But I hope that we take this opportunity to do that.
So part of the conversation, it feels like, is about the tools at hand and the willingness to actually embrace those tools. And I guess another part of the conversation is about relationships, trust, and attitudes. This is something that does come up in the book to an extent, about this erosion of trust, not just in government, but in the function and the integrity of democracy. And there's that erosion of trust, especially as time goes on, about whether democracy still works in the 21st century. I worked on the ABC project Australia Talks last year, where we harvested all these attitudes about different things in Australia to map those attitudes out. And Australians disagree on so many things, but the one thing that they agree on, and I'm so sorry to say this, Jess Scully, is Australians agree that they just really don't like politicians. And I
was expecting that, that's fine.
And it does make me think, though, without trust, how can democracy work? That's a more macro question, but do you think, where do you think we've gone wrong, and what can be done about restoring that trust in our civic institutions and the people who work in them?
I think they're too far removed from our normal experience of everyday life. And I think they are so straitjacketed into having to toe the line of party, team blue or team red or whoever, that it doesn't feel authentic. And that's why I think when you have these people who are perhaps less polished but feel more genuine and authentic, it resonates with people. And I think it's not necessarily what they're saying, but the fact that you feel like you could be having a real conversation with them. So partly I think it's the straitjacketed approach and the sort of the lack of freedom for people, even within political parties, to have their say. I mean, I think in Australia it would be hard for someone like an AOC to emerge because, she's within the Democrat Party, but she is at odds with some of the leadership of the Democrats, and likewise Bernie Sanders, likewise Elizabeth Warren. And they're the people who have really radically shifted the debate in the US coming into this really important election. So I think the way we do politics alienates people, and it is inauthentic. And then I also think the level at which we make decisions is unhelpful. And I had a conversation yesterday with Eva Cox, who's this incredible social activist, and I'm so lucky that I just get to hang out with her. And
she's an icon. She's had her own postage stamp, people.
She is iconic, and I feel so elated that I can go around and have a cup of tea with her. And she said, we need to talk about decisions being made to being devolved and being made at the lowest appropriate level. So how do we get people actively involved as citizens? Because people trust their neighbours, they trust each other. It's only when decisions are abstracted out and further away from the source or the people that they influence, that they impact, that we lose trust. because there isn't that direct accountability or that personal connection. And so that's why one of the other most inspiring stories for me is Syria. There's an incredible story from Rojava, the Democratic Confederacy of North and East Syria, like a place that is just going through unspeakable torment. And yet they have created this vision of hope, of locally driven decision making and power that flows upwards. And their motto is, or their translation of what they do is society leading itself. So that idea that people are accountable, invested, capable of making these decisions together. And I think if we can have that, if we can have localism and locally devolved decision making, but still a sense of greater connection and not a sort of like keeping people out, but a sense of global solidarity and connection at the same time, then we might be able to correct that inadequacy of trust.
Jess, your book Glimpses of Utopia really ranges widely in terms of the topics that it covers. So the chapters span recentering the citizen, politics, redesigning work, reward the human, reform finance, restore the commons, rebuild for equality, restart a civic conversation. And we could talk about each of those, and I would love to at some stage talk about each of them, but that's a much longer event. I'm wondering, of those chapters, what's really been at the forefront of your mind lately, and why?
Well, care has really been at the forefront, because I think, you know, there's so much that is happening in the world now because we don't value and reward care. And I talk about care as being the most fundamental human impulse, care for each other and the planet. And, you know, if we paid our healthcare workers, our elder care workers and childcare workers properly, and they didn't have to work across multiple centres, for example, it would have had a dramatically different outcome for the spread and the mortality rates around COVID, because 50% of people in the US and Europe and Canada who died from COVID were in aged care homes. And we're seeing the impact of that here as well. And so that situation is this really stark example of how allowing poor conditions and inequality to fester is a system risk for society. And it's just made that really vividly real. And I think for a lot of people as well, understanding the complexity of early childhood care and how it's not just putting Bluey on for 12 hours and then trying to do your work is becoming more evident as they're having to manage work and care at the same time for kids. And then also caring for the planet is another essential part of that conversation. And, you know, how do we meaningfully engage with First Nations practices when it comes to care for country? And how do we make sure that the policies and programs we have that are about environmental responsibility, honour those and engage with them respectfully? So the care chapter is really alive for me in the news every single day at the moment. So that's the one that I think is probably standing out.
One of the things that I really get from the book is, you know, there's an ongoing conversation about how to affect change best. Like if you take climate change, the conversations are either so individual, which is, you know, recycle and compost and make sure you change your energy company or all that sort of stuff, or they're on the top tier level and it's about the structure and it's about federal government and the policies of the nation state. But you work in local council, you work in the government of communities, and a lot of your book is about what's happening on a local level. And I think sometimes that mid-tier of engagement is sometimes missed in those conversations of change. So what can we do at a local community level that's really effective in driving change?
Be a YIMBY, right? There are a hell of a lot of NIMBYs in the world, right? Not in my backyard. But if you are a YIMBY, you're saying, yes, in my backyard. You're saying, yes, I want a cycleway. Yes, I want a community garden. Yes, you know what? Affordable housing is pretty good. I think I'll allow that in my neighborhood. You know, it's about opting into things. And unfortunately, the systems that we have at the moment are designed to privilege the correspondence and the voices of people saying no. And I think we often are most motivated to respond to object to things. It's the nature of protest as well. You know, even from a progressive perspective, we go out to protest against things, not for them. So how do we galvanize energy and have systems for supporting things and ways to spread information about initiatives that you could back, particularly in your local area? So that's the first thing. And I think having a way to broaden the conversation about who gets involved in those processes and the kinds of things that they support and preference is really important, because it tends to be homeowners who have had a long connection to a place, which is understandable that they're really tied to a sense of it in a certain way. They understand how the system works. They often have a language advantage in that they might have English as a first language, and they're more likely to have time. They might more likely be older and know the systems to get their voices heard. So how do we get tenants, younger people, people from different backgrounds, people with different priorities to have their voices heard? Because we need to balance up the scales and make sure a whole picture of society is being heard on local issues, on everything from nightlife to environment to housing and well beyond.
Jess, we've got a few more minutes together before we're going to open it up to the audience, but I want to ask you a few more questions, and one about the current moment in which we find ourselves. You write at one stage that the world post-COVID-19 will need to reinvent itself, and do you see opportunity in this crisis? You know, because I think so often when it comes to catastrophe, crisis and emergency, our instinctive response is to go with what we know and trust. That's a completely understandable response, but I imagine that for so many tiers of government, the response is to go rigid. Are you optimistic that it's actually going to go the other way, that maybe it will make government more responsive and supple?
I think government looks solid and, you know, rigid and immovable, but what they really are is scared, right? I think the torrent of abuse that people experience when they are in a community leadership role or when they try and do something that is outside of the status quo is overwhelming. And if you take a risk and get it wrong, that's the end for you in a lot of cases. And we have an unforgiving climate when it comes to people trying new things. And most institutions of government are designed to mitigate risk. So how can you embolden and empower and reassure your elected leaders or people making decisions on your behalf that you've got their back and that you support them taking a risk and that there's more people who want them to do that? And there are systems for that. And one of the systems is citizens' juries. And there's actually a big citizens' jury on at the moment in France, where basically, you know, with the yellow vest movement, Macron freaked out because his carbon tax, you know, created this movement, and people were saying, well, this is going to heighten inequality, and so we don't want any engagement with a carbon tax. So he got 150 randomly selected French people to get together and help design the policies and actually select the policies that France is going to adopt to meet their carbon emissions goals. And it's a way of giving politicians social license to proceed and say, we tested this with a mini public, and this is what they told us to do. So it gives them a shield. And we did a similar process at the City of Sydney. We had a citizens jury last year, which was about going through the 2,500 ideas we'd received around our vision for 2050. And what we got back from that citizens jury was for us to be bolder, to actually not just talk about sustainability, but to talk about a regenerative city, a city that centres truth-telling around First Nations and the history of this place as the place of invasion. You know, that puts nightlife and creativity at the heart of everything we do. Like, we thought we were radical lefties, and then we talked to the public, And they told us to try harder. And I love that,
Wow.
you know?
I do love hearing about citizen juries, this mechanism that we use to deliver legal verdicts, but can also be used in such interesting ways to deliver policy and recommendations. Such an interesting kind of new limb of democracy that's been growing. I want to just touch on something you mentioned before though, Jess, when you talk about fear and, you know, the abuse that politicians, I imagine councillors get when you're implementing policies, going forward with ideas. What's the pep talk that you give other people, that you give yourself when having to face that fear to do something bold, innovative and risky?
I guess for me, it's that there are more people, that I know that there are more people whose voices I haven't heard from in that context, but I meet every day and I talk to every day, and after we make a decision that might be difficult, I hear from people and I talk to people on the street or online who thank us for taking those steps, you know? So even though the system isn't designed for that kind of feedback, I know it's there. And so I have to have faith that we've got to be brave and take risks. And sometimes I also think this will be over soon. And, you know, you just have to get through it. And that every kind of good change has been difficult. And, you know, I might have a hard time today, but it'll probably be nothing compared to what Clover went through, you know, 30 years ago when she was battling against much more entrenched and misogynistic forces and, you know, didn't have the benefit of what she has created today, you know, by having this 16-year history of leadership in Sydney. So yeah, I think giving myself a bit of a context in time also helps.
There's so much to deep dive into when it comes to reading this book. And towards the end though, you're like, hey, look, you've gotten this far, but here are some takeaways. And one of the takeaways that I really love is, first of all, you don't have to do this on your own. In fact, changing the world is never a solo sport. And with that in mind, do you have any advice or even personal experiences that illuminate how people best find their tribe? If you want to start finding your people to do this with, what are those steps?
I think the first thing I'd say is that it's impossible to solve every problem at once, and you will be overwhelmed if you try and take on everything. And so I think pick the field that you're connected with, the idea that resonates with you, or the place, you know, whether it's a place, a discipline that you have, or a skill that you have, a community that you're connected to, or an issue that resonates with you. Pick one, and then see who's already doing great work on that front, because most of the time you don't need to start a new organization. Most of the time you just need to add your voice and your ideas to something that might already exist. And that's a way of connecting and building those personal connections with people. And then I look at how can you make those connections between theoretical or abstract groups or communities and place. Because even though a lot of concepts and challenges that we have to tackle happen in the realm of policy and are remote, or they affect people across a lot of different geographic boundaries, politics is tied to place. And so it's really important to know where to have impact and where to organise to have your voice heard, and at which level of government you need to have your voice heard, or is it in the private sector that you need to have your voice heard. So I think first of all, kind of pick your domain, and then figure out who else is already there, and then go and be an enthusiastic joiner, or make connections between different communities and groups.
That's great. We're going to bring Sam back in soon with questions from the audience. But before we do, final question. Jess, you have a kid now. Not bringing this up just because, I mean, very cute kid, but also I want to know, what has writing this book clarified for you as a parent when it comes to thinking about the future? As you were writing it, did it clarify or change things about your attitudes thinking ahead?
Yeah, you know, it's changed my sense of time. And I think also, like, everyone's had their sense of time messed with this year, you know. But it's something that a lot of people think about is, you know, what's your responsibility bringing a kid into the world today when there are so many challenges ahead of us? And it's something that we thought about as well. But for some reason, I kind of felt like we've got time, you know, we'll get there. And then Ellie was born and we couldn't go outside for 3 or 4 months because the air was toxic. And suddenly this abstract notion of climate change and climate disaster was real, and we were living it, and it had a tangible impact on her health immediately. And so it heightened my sense of urgency, and it compressed my sense of time. And I think also the past year of you know, living with her and seeing how quickly she grows and changes and how time just is blowing by so quickly. The idea that we have to change the way we live in the next 10 or 20 years, I can see how quickly she's growing. I can sense that time is going to go very quickly, and that we have to act today to get the tomorrow we want. And she's become this hourglass, you know, that we like that wakes us up every morning, and makes it much more real.
Thank you so much, Jess. I think for this reader at least, it made me think a lot about the kids in my life as well, and the stakes are laid so bare. But what I love about your book is it gives you hope, energy, and galvanizes readers. And I can't wait for all of you watching this right now to be able to experience the same thing. Thank you, Jess. Let's bring Sam back into the conversation now, and get some questions from those who have joined us in the chat.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks, guys. That was so fascinating, so interesting. We've got a few questions here, so I'm going to play the part of the audience and throw them out there. Firstly, Jess, someone says, hi, Jess. Hi. What do you think is the best way to counter people's fear of what they think of as radical changes?
Yes, and this is really real and true, and it's normal in a time of uncertainty to be more fearful of change and to kind of think, well, let's just keep things as they are. I was going to change my job, but I won't actually, you know, that kind of mindset, totally rational and understandable. But what I would say is that, I'll say 2 things. First of all, we've already been living through a time of radical change just in my lifetime. You know, we have seen the climate change radically just in the time that I've been alive. If you haven't seen that project that maps the heat of the, you know, every year since you were born, go and look at that, because it is a striking visual representation of how this thing is happening right now, and it's radically changing our whole natural world. Also, the nature of work, the nature of our economy and our careers and how we engage with making a living has changed radically just in my lifetime, in my work lifetime. And it has happened without any public engagement or consultation. It's happened to us. And we haven't had the forum or the language or the power to speak back to that and say, hang on a minute, internet giants, you have completely redesigned the world of work in a radical way. And now it's time for society to put some fences around this Wild West and get you to play by some rules. So the radical stuff has already happened. It's now our responsibility, I think, to contain that and to civilize it. And then the second thing I'd say is the status quo isn't that great. Everyone's, whether before COVID, before the bushfires, people were not doing that well. I mean, everyone I know was working longer hours to pay more rent on places that they weren't going to be able to buy, to send their kids to a childcare most of the time that they could barely afford, you know, and that's if you were lucky, you know, and the world as it is becoming more unfair and more unequal, more polarised, more disconnected from each other. That's nothing to cling on to. And I feel like more of us, I know that more of us have more to gain from a world that we opt into with a rule set that is designed with more of us and with more human values at its core, than to proceed with this outdated system that continues to privilege a few to the detriment of most of us, but also the continued life on the planet. So it's kind of, what are you saving? And some of us, you know what, we might not be able to go travel overseas as much. You know, we might not be able to buy as many things. Maybe some of those things will need to change. But if what we get out of it is a greater sense of local connection and responsibility, and a greater sense of being needed and valued contributors to our society, and more of us doing work that we value and is rewarded, then I think that's a really good trade-off.
Thanks, Jess. We've got a few people from regional New South Wales and regional Victoria. So hello, all you people. This is a great one. Laura says, hi, I'm standing for local council in Strathbogie Shire in Victoria this October. I'm so excited that you've released this book as it resonates so much with her. I'm feeling confident about my opportunity, but no, I won't be the candidate for all. How can I make the connection to those who don't see the exciting opportunities and possibilities of leading boldly and taking risks to make the changes we need to shift how politics is done?
It's really hard when you realise that not everyone is going to like you or feel a connection with what you're saying. And it is really, really hard not to fall into a camp, and I'm terrible at it, and I need to do work on this in a really major way. But I think there's a person in the book, a professor named Case Dorth, who is working on a project for the UN Sustainable Development Goals, but he's also a lecturer at UTS, and is this great thinker, and he talks about this thing called the social space, and basically it's about understanding what people already value, and what they're willing to do or give up that is to achieve an outcome that is in line with those values but has a bigger social benefit. So I think one of the things I want to do more of, and that I think is really valuable in these sorts of contexts, is understanding people from a values level and understanding how you can connect with those intrinsic values about what matters to them, you know, family or place, or when they talk about tradition, what is it within tradition? What is it within heritage? All those sorts of things that actually has significance for them. And how do you pull out a connection to that deeply felt feeling? You're not trying to change anyone's values, because you will never do that. What you're trying to do is find a point of common ground between your values and theirs, and begin the conversation from that point of view. And it is also about respecting that sometimes change does involve some people losing out, and something that they've always had perhaps being taken away. But what do they get instead? What do they get to compensate, or that they might not have thought they might appreciate or value? You know, we're going to take away a car space, but there's going to be a beautiful new community garden in that spot, you know, and you can be a part of it, and you can make new friends, and you can grow veggies. And, you know, how do you get people to imagine the possibilities of that trade-off?
There's so much positivity coming through here. This one, yeah, it's all good. It's all good. Someone's asking or commenting that the citizens' jury was great. Maybe this is someone who was on the jury.
Oh, cool.
How do we go to the next step? Mobilise people and groups that took part in the jury to become involved in implementing the ideas.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be fantastic. I think in that particular instance, the outcome of that jury was to shape a policy direction and a sort of our community strategic plan, which then becomes our plan for the next 10 years. And so then there are opportunities over the next 10 years to activate or execute aspects of that plan. And I think one thing that we do need to work on, both at the city but also in other levels of government and other places in Australia, is that we tend to do things to people. We don't really do it with them. And I think you get a much more meaningful engagement and you get better ideas and better outcomes when you do it with them. So figuring out how we do that, I think, is a really important piece of work. And how do you empower the community to do that? And how do you de-risk that for politicians and for bureaucrats whose responsibility is to safe and steady and secure outcomes and transparent use of public money? So understanding how we can resolve that tension, and in my view, what we'd need to do is to then prototype what that looks like, and again, get people to see the benefit of that approach and how the risk is counterbalanced by the outcome. So that's a process, but it's really worth undertaking.
Thanks, Jess. Anna says congratulations on the book, and she would love to know what, if anything, you will do differently in your work as a result of what you've learned in researching and writing the book.
I mean, lots of things, Anna, lots of things. Look, from me, from a policy perspective, it's already guided a lot of the work that I've done. So I, last year, asked the city to introduce a local procurement policy. And this was inspired by the work in Preston and also in Cleveland around community wealth building. And so I asked the city to investigate how and where we spend our money, and to figure out what's stopping us from spending more money in local communities. And that's to stop money that we spend being extracted out to, corporations that might be based offshore, people that don't pay tax, people that exploit their workers or don't have an environmental responsibility. And then just this month, I followed up by asking the city to investigate a community wealth building policy. So that's about taking that knowledge of how do we do local procurement and turning it into a policy for the city to abide by, but that also turns us into an anchor institution for investing back in our local community, and then working with and radicalizing all of the big institutions that we work with, like universities and hospitals and big agencies, to try and get them to also adopt that approach. So I've done, that's one way that we've had immediate policy application of the work that I've researched, as well as the affordable housing and alternative models for affordable housing and alternative approaches to land. So from a policy perspective, I feel like the City of Sydney is this wonderful laboratory where we have the opportunity to test out these transformative ideas, and we have the political energy to do that. But then also from a personal perspective, I have a lot of work to do on addressing that us and them mindset of how you do politics, because it's an adversarial system and I'm good at arguing. I need to be better at that. And so for me, that's the part, it's the personal learning part of that I need to take away and work on for the rest of my life.
No, just nothing too big then. That's all fine. Jess, I'm going to finish on this, which is a comment, because I think it's a really lovely comment, and also it'll allow me to do a bit of a plug for the book. Alex has said, "Hi Jess, no question here. Just wanted to say a huge thank you for tonight. I'm feeling very energized by your optimism and I can't wait to read the book. Thanks." Alex. So thank you, Alex. And the plug for the book is out now, available in all good bookstores. Here it is, Glimpses of Utopia.
It's very shiny.
Very shiny and beautiful colour, love it. Looks great on screen. It's also available if you want to purchase it online from the State Library of New South Wales bookshop, just FYI. But yeah, all good bookstores around. Jess, you've got another event coming up if people want to hear you. Do you have the date off the top of your head?
I have two good ones coming up next Wednesday for Booktopia, in conversation with the legendary Sally Rugg, radical activist, change maker legend. currently coming to you from lockdown. So that's going to be fab. And then on Saturday for Melbourne Writers Festival, in conversation with Damon Gamal from 2040. So, and that is also a great chat. So we've recorded that one already, and it was really good. So, you know, it's worth it, that one.
This isn't pre-recorded, we're totally live.
It's a guarantee, that one.
So listen, thank you so much to both of you for coming along tonight and for coming to our virtual State Library of New South Wales from, you know, around the country. Ben, thank you. So
Thank you, Sam.
time traveling up there and still zooming in with us. Hope everything goes well. Jess, congratulations. I personally, but you know, we're both so pleased that that we could be here to help you launch the book tonight. It's such a great achievement, and you should be really proud.
Thank you, everyone. I am so honoured, and thank you, Ben. That was wonderful, and thanks for coming, everybody.
Yeah, and we'll see you all again really, really soon. Take care, everyone. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.